Shalom and welcome to the One Pasuk podcast, where the rabbis at Congregation Avas Torah each share an insight on one particular pasuk from the Parsha and reflect on each other's ideas. Rabbinic banter, I like to call it. I am Chaim Pupko, and I am joined by my dear friends and teammates, Rabbi Daniel Goldberg
Shalom.
And Rabbi Morty Kisus.
Shalom.
If you'd like to sponsor an upcoming episode, please contact the shul. All right, here we go. Welcome back to the One Pasuk podcast, back after a very brief hiatus, and really excited to be diving in to Parshas Shoftim. Our One Pasuk for this week comes from the very beginning of the Parsha, Parshas Shoftim, Perek Tezayin, Pasuk Yudches, chapter 16, verse 18. Shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha b'chol she'arecha. Judges and officers you shall place in the gates of all your cities. Asher Hashem Elokecha nosein lecha lishvatecha, that Hashem is giving you for your tribes. V'shaftu esa'am mishpat tzedek, and they shall judge the nation. Mishpat tzedek, whatever that means, hard to translate, with due justice. Before we dive in, I just want to mention that whenever we get to Parshas Shoftim in the laning cycle, there is a sound that plays in my head at the beginning of the Parsha. And that sound is familiar to many, of course, and that is dun-dun, which is the sound from
Law and Order.
Law and Order. Because Shoftim v'Shotrim is law and order. Shoftim is law, and Shotrim is order, and that's the premise of the whole show, the relationship between the courts and the police.
It's there.
It's there.
I hear it.
All right, who's up?
Okay, the pasuk says, Shofetim v'shoterim titen lecha, in the singular. Moshe is giving a mandate to the Jewish people that they should set up a judicial system. Why does it say titen lecha? It should say titnu lachem. All of you should have these general principles and rules that you are, each and every one of you are required to abide by. Yet it says in the singular titen lecha. And the rabbis learn a very important lesson from here, that every person is their greatest officer, is their greatest auditor, is their greatest judge. Often in life, we base ourselves and our actions around what other people may perceive or what other people generally accept as the norm or the way to be. But rather, the Torah is telling us we each must have our own individual oversight, because no one knows us like we know ourselves. As we go through life, we have to ask ourselves, are we doing the right thing? People can't tell us that we're not doing the right thing, or we should be doing that or doing something else. But rather, all of us have to experience life and ask ourselves constantly, are we doing the most that we can do in terms of our own life, our own progress, our own vision of what we're trying to accomplish? But all too frequently, society's norms are what influence us to the extent that we start feeling, oh, I'm not doing enough, or perhaps I'm doing too much. And that's titen lecha. The Torah is telling us, no, you have to ask yourself, if you're doing as much as you should be doing, then you're okay. There's a classic story of Rabbi Yerucham of Mir, by the way. There's a Rishon by the name of Rabbeinu Yerucham, but I'm talking about Rabbi Yerucham Levovitz from the Mir Yeshiva. He was one time being an apprentice by Rabbi Yitzchak Blazer, the great Rabbi Itzela Petterberger, as some of you may know him. And he noticed that from Rosh Chodesh Elul all the way until Motzei Yom Kippur, he doesn't talk. Other than words of Torah and Tefillah, he doesn't talk. He doesn't talk to anybody. He keeps quiet. And Rabbi Yerucham was so inspired by this, he says, I'm going to do that. From Rosh Chodesh Elul until after Yom Kippur, I'm not going to talk. And then after a couple of hours, he started to think to himself, why am I doing this? It's so not me. I'm a communicative type. I'm social. I can easily inspire others in the process of being friendly and talkative. And so he recognized that titen lecha, this one doesn't work for me. This is not something that I can do individually. And that's why it was written in the singular and not in the plural of titnu lachem.
Such a beautiful idea. And the beginning of your idea reminds me of a conversation I had with my daughter Ayala just last night, because she's preparing her college guidance stuff, her essay for college applications. And she was a little stressed about how much help she needs from her parents or whoever. And I was trying to tell her that you're not supposed to have all the answers. You're not supposed to be able to do everything on your own all at once, right? This is how you learn. It's part of the process. Even the greatest authors had editors. And it made me think of a Gemara, which I shared with her, that there's this principle of Adam Karov Eitzel Atzmo, right? A person is biased towards themselves, meaning we see the world through our own lens, and sometimes we need others to help us see another perspective. Then I remembered that there's another principle in the Gemara that says, Eino de mesi masmo Russia, right? A person can't indict themselves. A person can't render themselves a Russia. And I was thinking at that moment that it's such a nice balance, like these two extremes that kind of push us towards the middle, that, on the one hand, we should be willing to seek advice and help and support from other people. But on the other hand, we can't see ourselves as completely dependent, as lacking any sort of capabilities. And so this idea of Shoftim v'Shotrim titen lecha, that we have to find some sort of internal voice, I think it really means, as you're saying, that, we do have to cultivate a sense of introspection and self-awareness. But you get that from your interactions with others. It's almost literally like Shoftim v'Shotrim, like implanting judges and officers within yourself, right? Because you are listening to others and then using those other perspectives to incorporate in your own perspective.
It is a very complex idea because on the one hand, I think what you're describing is being honest with ourselves and having an honest reckoning for when we are or are not doing our best. At the same time, there are objective standards, right? It's not like, Shachris just isn't for me. It's not totally like a free-for-all that you can just kind of divine from the ether, like this is my truth and this is how I want to live. So there is a lot of balancing and countervailing values here. But I do think that, generally speaking, when we are not doing our best, when we are not putting forth our best effort, when we're not living up to the values that we promote and want to live by, we know it. We're our best judges of that, and we have to be honest about that.
Yeah.
So all those things, I think, are kind of swirling around. And it dovetails with a very simple point that I wanted to make. The pasuk says, Shoftim v'Shotrim titein lecha b'chol she'arecha, and the implications are seemingly that this is a mitzvah particular to Eretz Yisrael. And in fact, Rambam says that this is a mitzvah specifically for cities, for places within Eretz Yisrael. The Ramban pushes back and says, no, of course there has to be dinim, there have to be judges, even when we're in the Gola, when we're in the diaspora. And he draws a certain distinction between how the divisions, is it have to be every city, or is it more of a broader area, whatever the case may be, fine. But I think the idea that this mitzvah has greater resonance in some way with Eretz Yisrael reflects this idea that, look, I'm giving you a gift, Hashem is saying. I'm giving you Asher Hashem Elokecha nosein lach, the land that I'm giving you. This is a gift. Now, what you have to do is you have to create the boundaries, and you have to create for yourself a system that's going to make this healthy and balanced and kind of work. And I just think that model, very like 30,000 foot, is like a model for everything in life. Like Hashem gives you a car, He gives you a home, He gives you a phone, He gives you screens, He gives you lots of blessings in your life. And Shoftim v'Shotrim titein lecha b'chol she'arecha, right? You have to create the boundaries, and you have to create the bumpers that are going to make this a healthy blessing, that is going to make this a blessing that you can handle, right? We have so many blessings. Humanity asks if we can do things, but not if we should do those things. So, right, where our blessings are just growing and proliferating, but we have to create the boundaries. We have to create the Shoftim v'Shotrim in all of those blessings that we get, just like when we got Eretz Yisrael. Shoftim v'Shotrim titein lecha b'chol she'arecha. Same is true for every blessing in our life.
So both of you, in different ways, reflected an approach to this pasuk that is taken up by so many. It's an allegorical approach that, instead of focusing on the plain sense of the pasuk, that it's just talking about courts and officers, there are lessons underneath, that these judges and officers are metaphors for how we judge ourselves. This is what some may call a Hasidic vort. Some may use that affectionately, some may not. But it's a Hasidic vort because Hasidim often find versive or non-literal interpretations that are far afield from the plain meaning. But I learned last year a way of looking at this pasuk that actually bridges the plain sense of the pasuk and the allegorical approach. Okay? The plain sense that we have to have judges and officers, and the allegorical, the lesson that we have to appoint judges and officers for ourselves, that we need to learn to judge ourselves. The Sefer HaChinuch, which offers reasons for all the mitzvos, when the Sefer HaChinuch discusses this mitzvah to appoint judges and officers, so we would expect the Sefer HaChinuch to give the most obvious reason that we have a system of courts and officers in order to maintain social order, in order to promote justice, That's a supreme Jewish value. It's a universal value. It's one of the Shev Mitzvos B'nai Noach. All of humanity is commanded to set up courts. But that's not the reason the Sefer HaChinuch goes with. He comes up with a less intuitive reason for this mitzvah. He says it's not for society, it's for the individual. The Sefer HaChinuch explains that we need a system of courts and officers so that we, as individuals, learn to respect authority. The Sefer HaChinuch writes, I'll just paraphrase in English, every person will feel a sense of fear of our judges and officials, and that sense of fear will keep a person on the straight and narrow. And once a person has been conditioned to be law-abiding, they will come to value obedience, and then apply that observance to Torah and mitzvos. So basically, the Sefer HaChinuch says that the mitzvah is to appoint judges and officers, but they don't merely exist to maintain social order. They also serve as examples. They serve as an object by which we can learn to be humble servants of the Kadosh Baruch Hu following his mitzvos. And so this is what I love about the Sefer HaChinuch, that the plain sense of the pasuk, the mitzvah, is still there to appoint courts and judges. But he's able to include the allegorical lesson at the very same time, that those courts and officers serve as role models, help to train us to respect authority, to be humble servants, and to be faithful to Torah and mitzvos.
That's very beautiful, and it also kind of ties into the idea that Tzion b'mishpat tipadeh, that the route to Jewish redemption is by way of a just society and a just criminal system and financial courts, and that one thing leads to the other. It's a much bigger. It plays a much more fundamental role than just making sure that if Reuven defrauded Shimon, that Shimon has a recourse to get his money back. It's a much broader thing.
Yeah, and if you back up just a couple psukim from Tzion b'mishpat tipadeh in Yeshaya, it says that a mark, an indicator of the Messianic era is v'ashiva shoftayich kevarishona v'yotzayich kevatchila, that the Messianic era will be marked by the return of honest judges and leaders of integrity. And there is a great Belzer Niggin to that pasuk, which I've been listening to since I'm a kid, and it's amazing, and maybe I'll end the podcast with it.
Definite outro. Definite outro.
But I warn you, it's an acquired taste. Thank you all so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed. If you're interested in sponsoring a future episode, please reach out to one of us, and of course, please send us your feedback. Shabbat Shalom and Good Shabbos from the One Pasuk Podcast.